Welcome. Welcome to Cage Free Voices Radio, an innovative educational entertainment radio show where youth and adults have the opportunity to see themselves even if the world is blind. I am your host, Bathsheba Smithen, and I am here with an amazing guest, Miss Allison Kugel. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you. And so just to give you a brief introduction of Allison Kugel, she is an entertainment and pop culture journalist with a syndicated interview column that reaches more than 10 million readers throughout the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. Her 300 plus published in-depth celebrity Q&A features raise the journalism bar with insightful and entertaining conversations with public figures from film, television, music, books, sports, and popular culture. Allison's celebrity interview features have been published by 70 digital and print media outlets around the globe, including USA Today, MSN, Pop Crush, Miami Living Magazine, San Diego Living Magazine, Hello Magazine, Las Vegas Magazine, Beverly Hills Times Magazine, Pop Wrapped, Tribute CEA, Showtimes.com, Deluxe Version Magazine, Bella Magazine, Life and Style Weekly, W.E.N.N, which is World Entertainment News Network, Sorted Magazine, Ebony, Hip Hop DX, Innovation and Tech, Today Magazine, and many other outlets worldwide. Allison is busy. I thought that I was a busy woman, but you are definitely leaving your footprint here on the earth. So welcome, Allison. Say something to the people.
Thank you for having me. That sounds like an impressive resume. I don't know who you're talking about.
So you're out in California, in Florida. You're in Florida
right now. Mm-hmm.
And so you're enjoying a little bit warmer weather than us over here in Southern Maryland.
Yeah, well, it's cool today, but we do have the palm trees and, the blue skies and the palm trees. So that's always.
Take some pictures from me and send them to me.
Yeah, right.
So I can just envision being there. So I want to start off with just asking you, because I'm sure a lot of young people would like to know, because they are where you used to be, just, dreaming and hoping to get to this certain place. So take us back to your experience growing up. What sparked your interest in journalism? And guys, we are talking about the power of your pen, and Allison Kugel talking about the path to journalistic authority. So tell us about, take us back to your experience growing up. What sparked your interest in journalism? And did you have any other career interest?
So it's strange. It's not that my interest in journalism was sparked. My interest in biographical information, like my interest in people's life stories, was what was my passion from the time I was probably my son's age. So he's about 11 now. I just remember being in middle school, and it's funny because things that seem so commonplace now, when you're young, you're just discovering things for the first time. So I remember wandering through the school library and discovering that there was such a thing as a biography, like the biography section.
Yeah.
And I could never get into reading in terms of fiction. It just wasn't really my thing. But I discovered, I'm like, there's this thing called biographies where you can read about people's lives. And I just was hooked right away. And I actually have memories of, you have lunch and recess when you're a kid. I would eat my lunch, and then I would go to the school library and spend my recess reading a biography, like about Madonna or Michael Jackson or somebody like that. And I would sit there and just absorb all this information. And I just became obsessed with people's life stories, because I love the fact that there's so much underneath the surface that you would never know if you don't bother to investigate. Even just everyday people walking around, I just, the way that my mind works, I'm always wondering what their story is. Like, where did they come from? Where are they going? What's going on in their lives? So that's really my passion, more so than, I guess, journalism. And that's why my journalism path is one that I had to carve out for myself, because I consider myself more of like a biographer or like a frustrated psychologist than a journalist, because I just love to sit down with somebody for a good like 45 minutes and ask them the kinds of questions that not only do maybe most fans or whatever people don't bother to ask them, but most journalists don't even bother to ask them. Like, what was your first childhood memory where you remember thinking that, you know, whatever it is, music or acting or whatever was going to be your life path? Or what do you think you came to this earth to accomplish? Or what's the biggest challenge you've ever overcome? Because I feel like the answers to those questions, they drop like little gems, little clues that can not only entertain and engage people, but inspire them. You know, because you can connect to that. It's something that you can't connect to, you know, a Bentley or a mansion or box office receipts or album sales or anything like that. But you can connect to somebody saying, you know, when I was 6 years old, I went to see this concert and it made me feel less alone. And that's when I knew that I wanted to play music, or, you know, just things like that. So that's really how it got started for me.
So could you elaborate a little bit on like carving out your own path? What did that look like?
Yeah.
I'm also trying to envision you as like this child walking around with biographies in your hand at lunch, and what that was like, you know, with your peers. Like, what were their responses? You know, just to give us a more vivid or more robust picture of you as a child.
As a child, I connected more with adults. I liked hanging out with my mother and her friends. I liked hanging out with my grandmother and her friends. And when I would be with other kids, I would always feel like on the outside looking in. I could actually, like, if I was, let's say, sitting with a group of girls and I was maybe 13 or 14, I would actually be witnessing it from like a different perspective someplace. So I've always had this feeling of like being on this earth, but not of this earth. So I'm a little weird. I'm a little weird.
Me too, Allison. Me too.
Really?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's just always been the case, and I always felt that adults had more to offer. And then like, but I don't know. I think everybody gets to a point where you kind of lose your way a little bit. Like I remember in college, I was like boy crazy, and I got into just doing the stupid things that people do when they're in college. And in my early 20s, I just kind of lost my way. I lost the connection that I was referring to when I was younger. It took me until my 30s to come back to that.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, because you start to get entrenched in the things that you think are more normal, like spring break and parties, and you know what I mean? You start to say, well, let me just sort of do that because that's what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And then I went through a phase where I got very caught up in my early 20s in feeling like the best thing I had to offer was my appearance. So I just remember I started doing some modeling, and I remember at the time I did nude modeling in magazines. And at the time, it seemed like just this zenith of achievement, which makes me laugh now at 46. I'm like, what the hell?
Girl, you look amazing.
I just, my path has kind of been like this. But I needed to go through certain things. I needed to go down a few different weird and dark roads to then come back to where I am now, if that makes any sense. So I guess, like, to answer your question, people didn't really know that about me. It wasn't something that people really knew about me because it just was something that I kept to myself and quiet. And I always guarded the most intimate parts of myself. So it just wasn't something that people were aware of.
Oh, thank you so much for your transparency and your story. reminds me of myself in terms of getting away from what I knew to be true about me. And so when I went to college, I didn't go to college to become a teacher. I was like, what I want to do is go to college to make, to become a doctor just because I wanted to make a lot of money.
Right.
And so I kind of lost, myself a little bit, and when I went to college, I spent all of that time. And so when it was time for me to go to graduate school, I was trying to kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle to make them fit and make sense, even though, here I am in education anyway, but I'm still using, because my background is in biology, I still use the same critical thinking process when it comes to teaching. So I totally get that. Yeah. Were there ever times where like your parents looked at you in this process and they kind of worried about where you were going, or talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I remember I was living in California. I had done a layout for Playboy, right? Mm-hmm. And then I hightailed it out to California from New York to move. Mm-hmm. And when the magazine came out, my mother called me up and she was like, I bought the magazine and you're totally naked. Like, she was just like,
oh, wow.
And said that they put me in cute little outfits and stuff. And I just remember her like saying to me, you're an adult, whatever you want to do, you're going to do. But it breaks my heart to think that you're compromising yourself in some way. Yeah, she's like, I don't want you to compromise yourself. She's like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know like what you're like what the end game is here, or what it is that you're trying to do or trying to express. But she's like, just don't compromise yourself. And I didn't get it at the time, but I'm a processor. So somebody could say something. I always say someone can say something to me now, and 5 years from now, I'll be like, oh my God, I understand what that person was trying to say. So it just took me time to understand. I think I was around 30 years old, and I was like, I started to realize that the best parts of me were the parts that I had kind of put away in a box. Mm-hmm. It was my intellect. It was my creativity. It was my communication skills. It was my sensitivity, my compassion, my ability to connect with people on a certain level and really like clue into who they are.
How did you transition from where you were to that space of understanding like I am more than my body?
Well, age. Seeing that your visage, your physicality is not as perfect as it once was, but just getting to the point where people would say things to me like, you're a really good writer, or you're a really good speaker. And I was like, oh, thanks. Okay, whatever. But it just kind of slowly sank in. I think people saying that to me over and over and over again, and then I started to realize that society kind of hypnotizes young women when we're particularly impressionable into thinking that the best that we have to offer is our sexuality, our youth, our appearance, our ability to be attractive to men. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, like, I could see myself as like Blanche Devereaux when I'm older. But it shouldn't just be about that, because we really have so much more to offer the world. And I think that I was hypnotized and drank the Kool-Aid like a lot of young women do. Even when you and I connected first on Clubhouse, I think, right? And when I wander into some of these rooms on Clubhouse and I see the profile pictures that some of these girls have, and it makes me a little sad, not because they're not beautiful, but because I feel like there's so much more beneath the surface that maybe they don't even recognize in themselves just yet. So I just wish that young women would really take the time to get to know who they are, apart from gaining the approval of society or the outside world.
That is so good, Allison. And so it makes me think about, how this message that you're conveying right now about the importance of understanding who you are and not just being driven by what society has said women should be or how women should look. This process of writing, since you've gotten to the place where you've been able to write, writing gives us the power to change nations, right? Alter lives and appeal to emotions without ever having to travel. So you have this message and you have this power to use to take that message without going anywhere. How does one wield the pen in such a way where one's voice is captured while also giving voice to the voiceless or those who already have an established sound in the community?
Wow. Gosh. Okay, so if there's one thing that this job has taught me, it's because I've interviewed now, I would say, give or take, it's probably about 300 public figures. So entertainers across music, television, film, some of our biggest health experts, what have you. I say that to say this: when I speak to these people, it's really no different than speaking to anybody else that I speak to. It's speaking to you, speaking to a friend or a family member, speaking to a stranger waiting in line at the post office. Their experience in the world is really not that much different than anyone else's experience in the world. And I think people would be really surprised to get that and understand that. Because what tends to happen to all of us in life, no matter what you have, what you think you have or don't have, is that whatever you have, let's say all the goodies that you have, right? Let's say you buy a house or you get your dream car or you buy a great outfit or an expensive pair of shoes or whatever. So at first you get that initial bump of elation, right? Mm-hmm. And it just you just kind of come back down to your baseline.
It normalizes.
It just normalizes, and then it just becomes integrated into your ecosystem, and then it's just a part of your everyday life, and you don't that elation doesn't continue, and then there you are just kind of being a person again. And I think what people don't realize, that I've had the pleasure and the privilege of learning, is that that's what happens to a lot of people, that we think that they must just be doing cartwheels all day because they have a lot of stuff and people think they're great and all, but eventually it just sort of becomes their life. And then there they are again, just kind of having a human experience on a day-to-day basis. And if there's one thing I hope that I share with people all over the world through my writing, is that message. And so that's why I try to normalize and humanize the people that I interview, because I'm trying to get that message across. And like I said, that is really the overriding message that I've gotten across, is that we're all having this human experience. And no matter if you're having it in a studio apartment or a 10,000 square foot house, at the end of the day, you're really essentially having a very similar experience.
Right.
More than people understand. And what it really comes down to is the work that you do inside. So that's what I hope to get across. Like when I do an interview and it's syndicated here and there and here and there, and it's reaching all of these different people, I'm hoping that it's touching them in a certain way. I'm hoping that it's making that impression, or maybe making them stop and think, that maybe I can see things in a slightly different way. That's what I hope to do. That's what I hope to accomplish.
That's good. That is so good. Humanizing people, right? We are sometimes, in being, viewers or spectators in the process, we just, glorify people or put them on a pedestal, and we think that, certain things don't bother them.
Yeah.
Life is just so grand, which helps me segue into the next question. Because now we're going to dive a little bit deeper. You're also an advocate for mental health awareness and have shared your story in your book, Journaling Fame. Y'all got to get this book. Listen. Yes, Journaling Fame. Many youth work diligently to acquire fame, but may not be mentally ready for the challenges. What would you say to them about what it takes to mentally prepare for a career of your sort?
My career, I mean, look, I'm a civilian, right? So while I interview and profile very famous people, I myself am a civilian. So I go here and there and everywhere. And even if someone could have very well have read all my articles and not know me from a hole in the wall. So I just kind of go about my business. As far as like my career, I find it very therapeutic because what I have found about myself, and part of what helped me heal from a lot of the anxiety and panic attack issues that I had, is that helping others helps me. So when I have a conversation with somebody and I share whatever wisdom I've accrued throughout my life, or I sit down with somebody and try to help them, it's actually quite therapeutic for me. So my career, doing interviews, talking to people, asking them about themselves, and having that exchange of energy is actually quite therapeutic for me.
Nice.
Yeah, it really is. I'm getting like
Same here. Same here.
But
there's something about being able to help other people. It does something for you as well. Yeah.
But I think that the best advice is do what you do what you love. Don't concern yourself with where you get your paycheck from. That's a big mistake that people make. I can't tell you how many times somebody says to me, I wanted to be a photographer, but I've got to make a living, so I went into IT. Or I want to be a writer, but I'm not making a living at it yet, so I'm doing this. Or I want to be an actor, but it's too risky, so I'm doing this other thing, whatever. My feeling is do what you do what you love, do what you are. It doesn't matter where you're getting your paycheck from.
Do what you are.
Ring some bells.
Do what you are. I love that. I would have to quote you on that.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter where you get your paycheck from. If being a photographer is your passion, go photograph things on the weekend. If you want to be an actor, go do local theater while you're doing whatever else it is you're doing. If you want to be a writer, write. Offer to write for different, there's so many opportunities now. I mean, my career started just at the birth of digital media. So I was able to get in on the ground level. But the first 2 years that I did these interviews, I didn't make a dime. I did them for free. And then slowly over time, I found ways to monetize what I was doing. I started making money here. I started making money there. I started figuring out how to get paid to do what I love. But for 2 solid years, I did these interviews for free. And I did them because they were such an authentic extension and expression of who I am. And that's why I did it. And so that's my advice to people is just do what you love. Just do what you are. The money and the success will come. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's my advice.
So with saying that, right, I know the follow-up question, and then I'm gonna ask another question about the anxiety and the panic and where that was stemming from. Those who want to do what they desire, do what they are, right, and sustain themselves. How did you sustain yourself during those 2 years?
The way I did it was I was doing, and I still do consulting work. I was doing public relations work for different people. So I was making money doing public relations, and then I was doing the interviews for free. And while I was doing it, I was figuring out all this stuff. I was like, so this is how the media works, and this is how these two things work together.
That's so awesome.
And I'm like, this is how I can actually help my clients, and this is how I can promote my interviews. And I'm like, oh my God, I was learning so much and connecting so many things, and I just got shrewder and shrewder about how to keep climbing up the rung and climbing up the ladder. And I learned that another thing I learned is asking people for opportunities is not as effective as offering them something of value. that they need. Because I remember I would contact these publications and say, can I do interviews for you? Can I do this? And they would kind of blow me off. And then when I managed to convince someone, if I convinced a celebrity to do an interview with me, and then I'd go to a publication and say, I've got this interview. And they were like, oh, welcome. Welcome. Okay, so you have to come with something of value that people need from you, rather than saying, can I get something from you?
Right.
I know that it sounds like a catch-22, but if I could figure it out, anyone can figure it out. You have to think outside the box. And the other thing about writing that people don't get is that writing does not happen at a computer. Writing happens when you are living your life, when you are thinking thoughts, and I hate to say this because I'm going to sound a little bit of crazy, but when you're talking to yourself, that's when you write. Okay? You know
in
what
the
I'm saying?
shower, in the bathroom, in the kitchen. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Talking to yourself and you're like, oh my God, that's I just said something amazing. And then you go and you type it out, right? So we are writing all the time. People think they have writer's block because they sit down at their keyboard and they put their fingers to the thing and they're like, you know, they don't know what to write. But you were writing when you were in the bathroom brushing your teeth and thinking all of these things, you were writing. So now just go and type it out.
That's good. And we even have the voice recorder on our phones now, so you can just hit record as you're talking to yourself. And I do that oftentimes, especially when like a song comes to me, and I'm a spoken word artist, so I get these incredible downloads, and so I have to keep my recorder next to me to record those things, because, like you said, it happens throughout just your everyday life. So just getting to, we talked about this, your writing being therapy and journalism being therapy for you. Since journalism is therapy for you, where was the anxiety and panic? Where were the panic attacks stemming from?
Panic attacks started when I was 8. And I don't know, this is a tough one because I could blame it on genetics because my mom suffered from anxiety and panic and agoraphobia. So I could say, and I did witness her having panic attacks and episodes of anxiety when I was a little kid.
Hold on, Allison. Agoraphobia for our young listeners. What is agoraphobia?
Agoraphobia is, and this isn't something that I have personally dealt with that much, but agoraphobia is a fear of, I would say it's a fear of venturing out to unfamiliar places. It's a fear of going outside your comfort zone. Like some people say it's a fear of leaving the house. It's not a fear of leaving the house. It's a fear of being outside of your safe space. That's really what agoraphobia is. Being a fear of being somewhere where you might feel unsafe and you can't retreat to your safety zone. That is agoraphobia.
That's wow.
Yeah.
I did do some research on that myself. But you were saying that, you can blame it on genetics, because, yeah.
I could easily blame it on genetics and say, well, my mom had it and I think her father had, but I really don't know if it's genetics, if it's environments. I mean, there were some things that happened in my childhood that that were definitely difficult to have to deal with as a kid. So it's hard to say if it's a combination thereof. I personally think, because I've been doing a lot of research about our genetics, how they work, and what I've come to learn is that genetics are kind of like light switches. So we have a lot of genetics that we inherit from our mother, from our father, and they all have like little light switches, if you will. And something could flip the switch on or flip the switch off, right? So something in your body can say, we're going to flip this gene on and we're going to turn this gene off, and or vice versa. And I think what happens is you've got a genetic predisposition to something, and something happens and the light switch gets flipped on, and then we're off to the races, and then and then you're in an acute phase of whatever it is that's going on. So really, it's the mind, body, and spirit connection. It's when the mind, the body, and the spirit are aligned, we are well from head to toe, inside and out, and we don't have these issues. It's when the mind, body, and spirit are out of alignment that these things tend to come to the surface. That's really what it is. And that's how I was able to heal from it.
So what practices did you have to help you get to the place of healing?
Well, I think number one, kind of a realization that a lot of the anxiety that we feel is really a paper dragon. And I always say that to people. I'm like, you're fighting with a paper dragon. You're literally fighting with a paper dragon, but until you get close to it and start poking at it, you're going to think that it's real, right? It's not.
That is so good.
You don't want to poke the dragon because you're afraid, right? But if you get up in its face and you start poking at it and you see that it's a paper dragon, you're like, hey, what's going on here? And you start to question these things. So that's really what I started to do. I started to question the physical symptoms that I was having. I started to question the scary thoughts that I was having. And I started to say, like, where are these thoughts coming from? They're not coming from me, because I would do this to myself. Clearly I wouldn't, if I say I can't stand having these thoughts, well, who am I? And then who are the thoughts? I started to kind of like separate from it and see it from a different perspective. And then, of course, obviously, I learned how to do positive visualization. I learned how to do deep diaphragmatic breathing. I learned how to use distraction methods, because the mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So what I started to learn, I love basketball. So if I would feel anxious and I would feel a panic attack coming on, I would go outside. I have a basketball hoop, and I would shoot hoops, and I would shoot hoops until I was physically exhausted. And I wouldn't even remember that I was having a panic attack, because my mind was so focused on getting buckets that I was like, I couldn't even remember the fact that I was having a panic attack. Because when you shoot baskets, the goal is to always get a swish, right? The goal is to not hit the backboard, and that takes focus. Or when you're riding, I ride horses too. When you're riding a horse, your body, mind, and spirit need to be in alignment, because you need to be communicating with that horse with your body language and your energy, so the horse stays calm and centered, so that you can be safe on the horse. So when you realize that your mind can't focus on more than one thing at a time, you find things to do to refocus your mind, and your mind does not have room to indulge some of these other things. So those are some things that work for me. Now, I'm always sure to be transparent and say, and I'm very open about this, that I do take Paxil. Because I don't ever want to give somebody the impression that I don't, because I've been taking it now for 20 years. I take a very small dose. So it's basically an SSRI medication, like Zoloft or Prozac. You've got Paxil, Celexa. There's like a whole bunch of them. What it does is, serotonin is a neurotransmitter in the brain, which keeps our moods in more of a happy, kind of stabilized place. So those medications make sure that your brain always has a sufficient amount of serotonin, which is a good place to start, because you want to start with a baseline of the proper physiology, right? So you need to get your physiology in order, and then you build upon that. Okay.
Listen, if my therapist friends are watching this, they are loving and eating up everything you're saying right now, because I want to emphasize to young people who will see this and who may be watching this right now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking medication for maybe some type of depression or anxiety, whatever it is, and seeing a therapist, because I love how you broke it down biologically. It does help with serotonin levels, or even with dopamine and everything else that's a part of our, I guess, psychological, physiological makeup.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought that up, because it, in some communities, it is like there's a stigma associated with just
Yeah.
discussing mental health. So I want people to get that. And I want to honor your time. So I'm going to go ahead and close out with this last question. And that is, what would you say, or in what ways would you say you are cage-free in your approach to helping others see themselves and the world through the lens of a writer?
In what ways am I cage-free in helping others see themselves through the lens of a writer? Meaning like through what I do?
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes back to what I said before, that I try to take an inclusive approach to my interviews. So I try to ask questions that bring us all together rather than make us feel other than each other.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You keep
Yeah.
dropping nuggets, Allison.
Yeah, I try to ask questions that will help to make people see their own reflection in what it is they're reading, rather than saying, because I had one of the first assignments I ever did when I first started writing, like 15 years ago. I got hired by Us Weekly to go to a party, like one of these red carpet event things, and do like on the spot interviews. And they wanted me to go there and gather like gossip. And it's never been my thing. So I was at the party, and I remember I'm talking to this one actress, and she was in her 20s at the time. Okay. And she'd had a little bit to drink. So she was a little bit tipsy, and she was in her 20s, and she started going on and on about how she was getting Botox. And then she realized what she said, and she was like, "Oh my God, please don't write that. Nobody knows." Well, and I felt bad, so I took it out of my report. I took like everything embarrassing out of my report, and I handed in the most boring report, and they never called me again.
I love that. Journalistic integrity.
Yeah, I was like, this is not for me. This is so not for me. Like, I'm not interested in writing about the things that either separate us or embarrass us or shame us. So I try to use my power I try to use my power to bring people together. And even in my book, I say, that we really need to throw shame out the window. Whatever it is that you're carrying, that you put in that shame box, just get rid of it. And that's another thing I try to accomplish with the power of my writing. And I would say the last thing that I've tried to set an example of in my life in general is, I think there's a myth out there that you have to take poor treatment from people to keep from burning bridges, because you always hear that. Like when I was coming up in my career, it was always like, don't burn bridges, don't burn bridges, be nice to this person, even if they're a jerk, like, just things like that. And my philosophy is different. I say some bridges are worth burning. So I say, burn, baby, burn. That's my
burn the bridges.
Burn that bridge, let that MF burn, and keep it moving, because I truly believe that nobody has the power to ruin your career, ruin your life, take things away from you that God has ordained for you. Mm-hmm. So I say, if somebody is ever mistreating you, abusing you, belittling you, go ahead and burn that bridge, because believe me, it's worth burning. And there will be other opportunities and other people that will come into your sphere of existence that respect you, that honor you, that believe in you, and that will, help to thrust you forward in one way or another. So that's
so good.
Yeah.
That is so good. I'm trying to remember who the person was in history that told them they were at war, and they said to burn all the bridges so that you have to move forward. There is no other alternative. And it's important to maintain the necessary connections, those connections that are part of your purpose, but allow God to direct that. Like I love that you mentioned God in this process. And I heard you say something before about like being in it and not of it. And I was like, she get that from the Bible. I was like, she get that from the Bible, because I feel that way too. But I love that you pointed out that there are times where, you know, we need to burn bridges because they could be toxic to our destinies.
Yeah.
But that's a great note to end on. And so I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank you, Allison. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, for this episode on the power of your pen and voice. Allison Kugel on Journalistic Authority. If you would like to find out more about Allison Kugel, follow her on social media at the Allison Kugel. That's Kugel, and you'll also see her name on the screen. Oh, and don't forget to buy her book, Journaling Fame. Stay tuned for the next episode. And if you like what you heard and would like your children to be involved in Cage Free Voices online learning, feel free to reach us at cfvonlinelearning.com. That's C as in cage, F as in free, V as in voice, cfvonlinelearning.com. All right, guys, remember to see yourselves even if the world is blind. Reflect, connect, and transcend every internal and external barrier that will try to cage your voice. Remember, be cage free, and make sure you don't allow anybody to cross a bridge that they should not have. Take care.
Bye.